Hello, my name is Dave Lewis, and I am the host of Cinemallennials, a podcast where myself and another millennial watch a classic film that we haven't seen before, ranging from the early 1900s to the late 1960s, and discuss its significance and relevance in our world today. On today's episode, I talked with my twin brother Tom about 1968's 2001, A Space Odyssey, directed by the legendary Stanley Kubrick. Due to its technical achievements in visual effects, its scientific accuracy, sound design, and how it approaches philosophy and life's biggest questions, 2001: A Space Odyssey is often considered to be the greatest film of all time. After the release of Dr. Strangelove, Kubrick wanted to set out to make the, quote, the proverbial good science fiction film. Based on the short stories of one of the most influential science fiction writers of all time, Arthur C. Clarke, 2001 covers the length and breadth of time and space, as our characters seek to discover the link between early and technologically advanced man. So sit back, relax, and open the pod bay doors to 2001, A Space Odyssey.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Welcome to the show, Tom. How old are you? What was the first film you saw in theaters, and what is your favorite film now?
I am 27. The first film I saw in theaters was Toy Story. And my favorite film now, it's not something I kind of have a concrete example of. It kind of changes. If I had to say off the top of my head, probably Blade Runner 2049. But ask me in a week or two and it could be different.
Your first movie being Toy Story, that was my first movie. So, can you recall how you first heard of or encountered 2001: A Space Odyssey?
Probably not. I know it's kind of like been a real influential, ubiquitous kind of thing, and I've seen it referenced and parodied in a lot of stuff I've seen, like Futurama, that kind of thing. But I don't remember the first time I've heard of it. It was probably so long ago.
Were you aware of its impact, its huge ideas that it had within the film?
I mean, I didn't know too much about the movie before I saw it.
Mm-hmm. What inspired you to pick the film?
I'm a big fan of sci-fi,
Mm-hmm.
and
We could definitely tell that with Blade Runner 2049 being your favorite one right now.
yeah, I'm a big fan of sci-fi and a lot of kind of the older sci-fi books as well. Like 2001's based on a book by Arthur C. Clarke.
Right.
And I haven't read that book, but it's it's a favorite genre of mine, and it's an influential movie just knowing that based off of parodies that have been done, like I said before, in Futurama or Spaceballs or whatever else.
So what was your first foray into science fiction?
Probably it was Star Wars.
Yeah, that's what I think with myself as well. I mean, like, we grew up in the same house, but I think that's the first thing I really remember seeing or interacting with sci-fi, and I think that's a lot of people's influence into science fiction, and definitely things that are influenced by Star Wars. So did you see the influence 2001 had on Star Wars?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there was a couple of shots that were just lifted straight from 2001 and put into Star Wars. One of the biggest things in Star Wars that people remember is the beginning shot of most of the movies, where you have the ship flying in right in front of the camera. And that shot is in 2001, and the ship's design is also pretty close to what's in 2001. But I mean, it was interesting to see how accurate they kind of wanted to try to make the movie to what it would really be like, and then some limitations on that realism.
When you look at the detailing of the ships, as well as like with the models and everything like that, with the sets, remember at the beginning of the movie where Haywood is going up to space, when he goes from the Pan Am ship to the International Space Station, you see the little like video, or like how in Star Wars at the end of Empire Strikes Back where it's Luke and the whole gang and they're in that little like window? You saw a lot of that in that scene, and I'm like, is this where like Lucas got blue screen from and like all his other ideas? Like, 2001, I said in the intro, is massively influential and massively technologically advanced for its time. The film came out in 1968, and at this time, people always say that Star Wars was this big foray into science fiction, and it was like such a breaking off point for the rest of sci-fi we see today. But really, 2001: A Space Odyssey is the one that's really the rocket that burst the bubble on sci-fi.
Yeah, I think 2001 was definitely a pioneer of it, and Star Wars kind of made it mainstream.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's always things like that. I mean, like look at Blade Runner. Like you said, Blade Runner was a big foray into the hard noir sci-fi kind of thing. With Star Wars was that it brought the fantasy element to science fiction as well as changing it from the stark white of everything that you see in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, this was a lot more hard science fiction. It was a lot more try to stay more realistic, and with a lot of science fiction, people kind of look at like, oh, look at what they predicted in these books and these movies, and it's here today. But I think it's more interesting to look at what they almost got right, but not quite, because we're all shaped by the time we grow up and the time that we live in, and that may close us off to certain ideas. Like the biggest example I saw is when they were in the meeting with Haywood. They had somebody left the room and they had an automatic door, but the door wasn't truly automatic. You had to push a button to open it and walk through, and then push a button to close it as like a doorknob. Where today it would just open and close all on its own. You wouldn't have to do anything. And I also think it's interesting to look at what they got wrong, like what you might expect things to be by a certain time that just aren't. Like we're not even today still at that level of space travel, anywhere near it, or even all of the brands that were featured in it.
Yeah, some of them are gone.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what I mean. Like we expect things that we have in our world that we're so familiar with and have been around forever to last forever, but they don't. Except advertising.
Yeah, there's a lot of advertising in it. But now, Tom, you studied This is a great film. I wasn't surprised at all that you picked this film, because growing up you were big into science, you were big into NASA and space travel, and much more than I was. I was more the history and movie person. What do you think, from what you know, what did they get right about this stuff? There's a lot of different things that anybody can tell us that they got right, like the video calling that they had, which is by IBM, which isn't the best thing right now, best company for that stuff right now. Do they even exist? I don't even know.
Yeah,
but,
they do.
Oh, they do? Okay. So what did you think, what you saw? Because I even asked you a question in the middle of the movie, like during a very vital point where someone gets ejected into space, and I was like, wait, shouldn't they be tethered? Because we've seen when we were younger, astronauts, when they're trying to fix something or repair something on the ship, that they're tethered usually to something else, a part of the ship. And you're like, no, that's not necessarily true. So what were the things that you thought Kubrick and the team got right for the film?
Yeah, so one thing that I really loved about the movie was when they were playing with your sense of perspective. On the spaceship scenes. I think the earliest scene where they do this is on the Pan Am flight, where the flight attendant goes and picks up some food for somebody and then walks up the curve of the wall because there's no gravity at this point. And she just walks up the wall, and it doesn't matter because, in space, when you're in free fall, this wouldn't really apply to a moving ship as much.
Right.
But when you're in free fall, there is no up or down because there's no gravity, and we naturally orient ourselves according to gravity. But in space, when you don't have a gravitational pull, it can get very strange and confusing, and you need to really be on top of it because what is up one moment could be down the other moment, and it doesn't feel any different. The other example I can think of is on the ship that's on its way to Jupiter, where the one character, I don't remember if it was Dave or Frank, climbs out of a hatch and then floats over to, either floats or he climbs a ladder, I can't remember, over to a wall and then walks straight down the wall. And it wouldn't work exactly like that, but I really liked that they wanted to give you a sense of this kind of loss of perspective and direction that would really occur there.
Right. It was funny. I was like, I have a feeling Tom's going to talk about that whole thing of the perspective and everything and gravity, because I was just like, and they actually developed the whole thing, Tom, where it was a massive set. Like they built it in a giant warehouse and the whole thing rotated. So when when he's running through the track and stuff, it's rotating.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole I mean, the massive amount of teamwork and intelligence that went into this film, and to the little intricate details, right down to the very things like what things could look like, what control panels would look like, how people would operate them, and how these people just, I mean, the actors, like you could tell they looked so natural, pressing the right buttons in the correct sequence. And I thought that was just amazing. Like, but it was funny that you're saying that because like when things were rotating and their perspectives were changing, I was like, "Ooh, I don't feel so great." Like I was feeling a little car sick or like I don't know, motion sick at some point. But I thought it was really cool to see a lot of the stuff that like we have today. Like they had these like massive iPad type of things. They had a lot of really cool stuff, and you can even see influences like with HAL, like with the iPhone and Apple products and different things like that. And I think that it's really cool to see from 1968 a lot of the stuff that they get right within the scientific stuff, but the stuff that we have today, like it's massively it's just really really cool.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of brings me back to what I was saying before about, we can imagine what the future will be like, but because of the context that we have around us now, we're going to get some things wrong.
Right.
Like, you mentioned the tablets that they were watching. Well, they never really had anything like that back then.
Right.
And the closest thing that was there was a TV, so they only used it as a TV.
Mm-hmm.
Where,
oh yeah, true.
Yeah, where instead of, integrating it more into everything else, like, a computer, like, why can't a computer screen show the kind of images that a TV can?
Mm-hmm.
Where they used a lot of the, line projection monitors on the screens and everything.
Now,
and then the other example that I thought was pretty fun was the video call that they did. They figured we'd be able to call on videos, but it was still a payphone. Like they never made the next jump to, well, what if you just had a phone in your pocket?
Right. Yeah, that was. I mean, that whole situation. Like, I thought that was really interesting to see. Like, oh, you have to have a whole pay card, and it was run by IBM, and it was like, I was like, just very funny. What did you think of the film overall? Did you like it?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. It was a little strange, especially at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And by strange, I mean disjointed.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to. It could be hard to see the connections of the scene at the beginning with the apes, and it seems like, is this really necessary? Is this really connected?
Mm-hmm.
I think it provides a lot of context that helps with the rest of the story and with some of the themes that are in it. But I enjoyed it overall. It really kicks into gear once you get into the sequence with Hal and Dave and the trip to Jupiter. But I think before then, it's a very different structure than I'm used to, at least. I'm used to more of a linear narrative structure rather than sort of an anthology structure where it's here's a story, here's another story. They're semi-related.
Right, and I felt that too because when you first start out in the film, like Tom's saying, the beginning of it is the dawn of man. So you're seeing these apes, and they're just going around picking for berries or picking for anything in this vast wasteland. And then what you see is, so you go from that, and you go from them are developing hunting tools and then weapons over time due to the mysterious appearance overnight of this black monolith. What are your thoughts about this monolith? We see it originally with the apes and how they kind of touch it and then go away and touch it and go away. And you kind of see the same thing with the astronauts and doctors that with Dr. Haywood, how they kind of do the same ritual, where they're like kind of unsure about it. They touch it like something's hot, but it's okay. And then we later see it with Dave. What do you think about this monolith?
Yeah, so the monolith kind of brings up a lot of ideas. One of them is, are we really alone in the universe? Are we the only intelligent creatures that are out there? The existence of the monolith, in my opinion, implies that we're not, and we're not even the most advanced. I think the monolith is a piece of technology sent to Earth, whether on purpose or by accident, that spurs the advancement of intelligence in creatures. But considering we don't know who made it, if it was even made, or the real true purpose of it, we'll never know that answer. But I think the monolith brings up an important thing to think about that I think a lot of people don't think about, is the fact that the monolith, although it was present at the dawn of humanity, is not a known and understood thing by the time the second monolith is discovered on the moon. And what that says to me is that nobody knew about the first monolith.
Right, like it says that, like they say in the movie, that it was buried under the lunar landscape for 4 million years.
Yeah, so what that kind of got me thinking about was, do we really know who we are? Do we really know what our story is? Are we the people we think we are? And not just on, a species-wide level, but are we really the people that we think we are individually?
Right.
And, that's something that I kind of thought about for a while after the movie ended. And I think it's something that, is worth a shot for more people to think about, because, we kind of go through our lives all believing a version of ourselves in our heads. But is that version of ourselves really accurate?
Right. It's like there's a lot of great philosophical questions this film brings up. And that's a great point that I haven't heard from anybody before concerning this movie. And it's just like, do we really know who we are in this universe and galaxy, and who are we really? I mean, even on Earth.
And do we get to where we are on our own? Or was something else pushing us or guiding us or forcing us into a direction?
Right. And it's just like it's really interesting because a lot of people believe in extraterrestrials, a lot of people don't. A lot of people think intelligent design, a lot of people think about evolution, and a lot of that stuff is exactly what hard sci-fi is. And when people see like Star Wars and different Marvel movies and things like Guardians of the Galaxy and stuff like that, a lot of that stuff gets lost in the shuffle. And I think 2001: Space Odyssey is great for someone that enjoys sci-fi, but also people that really want to think about films and want to understand how film as an art can let us inspect within ourselves to answer the big questions in life. And what happens is with that monolith, as it goes on, it does connect to 2001, that year in the film. Obviously not the year that we all experienced, but it's really interesting to see how and like Tom, like you said, how it's kind of disjointed in a way, and I think that could turn away people. But you're saying, and I also agree with you. I like the film up until a certain point. Do you think that people should power through that if they feel that they're either bored or they're not sure of where the film is going?
Yeah, I think even though disjointed and not what I'm used to in movies, I think it does provide context that's essential for the overall idea of that the monolith is what spurs the next step in evolution for the creatures that come in contact with it. Although I think it is interesting and it adds to the mystery of the monolith where we see it 3 times in the movie. And the first time is with the apes, and that spurs them to figure out how to use tools. And then the second time is when they find it on the moon, but that doesn't really spur any kind of progression or growth. That monolith doesn't seem to have the power that the first one had, and the third one, as we see, transforms Dave into some kind of new creature that we're not aware of or can describe because it's the next step in evolution.
Now, when you're saying all this, I was thinking, in some way, do you think the monolith's power of evolution is getting weaker or stronger?
What I kind of took it as is they're not the same monolith.
Oh, okay.
What I kind of understood as there was the first monolith which crashed into Earth, and the second monolith crashed into the moon. And the second one may not have meant to spur any kind of evolution, but just act as a pointer to the third one in the orbit of Jupiter. Okay.
So you're saying that the second one led to Jupiter?
Yeah.
Okay.
They in the movie they said that they traced a signal from the moon monolith to the one around Jupiter. The idea of the monolith is interesting because there's so many questions around it and they never get answered, which can be frustrating in one way, but it adds to the overall mystery, and it's probably better off that it's not answered.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree.
Who made these things? Did they send them to Earth on purpose to spur evolution? Was it an accident? And we'll never know. It's worth saying, like, if there is some kind of living being out there capable of creating this technology, it might present itself to apes and humans as a black monolith, and we can't figure out how to use it, but to a different form of being, it may be entirely different.
I like what you were talking about, how it's ambiguous as to who created it, and like we're not, as the audience, we don't know. We're not given that answer. Now, in films today, do you see that being an issue where there's a lot of films that just give every single answer that you ever want?
Based on the movies that I've seen, and I don't watch as many movies that you do, but I think there has been less ambiguity. I think people kind of want to see things get resolved and they want to know, even though there's been a lot of examples where you find out the answer and you don't like it because it's, you can think of a more satisfying answer in your head and it's better ambiguous. I mean, coming back to Star Wars, when it was revealed that the Force is coming from midichlorians in people's blood, people just flipped out and hated it. So sometimes we're better off not knowing, and we can kind of create things in our own heads that would never be able to be translated to film that we are more satisfied with than whatever somebody else could come up with. And I think that is kind of one of the unique things about filmmaking, is that it is a collaborative form of art, and it doesn't stop after the production of the movie, especially with mysteries like that, where even though you don't get any official input, when there's ambiguities and mysteries, the audience can participate in the film, even if it's in a small way.
Right. Like I think that's what one of like you hit the nail on the head there. I think that's one of the most beautiful things about film is if it's left to a certain degree of ambiguity, or if it's left to a certain degree of, oh, let me have my own opinion, let me have my own kind of thing without the director bashing my head in over what he meant or she meant. I think that's really amazing because I feel like to a certain degree, and I don't know, you can tell me if you don't agree, I think that adds to the film's longevity as a talking point within the zeitgeist as well as its legacy. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. If you spur discussion and there's no real answer to a question, then people can talk about it forever. Biggest example more recently would be the end of Inception, where Dom spins the top and, does it fall down? Does it not fall down? And the ambiguity kind of does give it staying power.
Throughout the film, there's only a couple parts that have music in it, right?
Mhm.
So when you felt the parts without the music, were there certain specific things that stood out to you?
Yeah, so the lack of music was actually not something that I noticed on my own until you've just mentioned it now.
Mm-hmm.
And it, I think it does add to kind of a sense of realism and tension, especially since, I've come to expect from movies there to be music in most scenes, if not all scenes, even if it's soft background music, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And it's, I think it kind of speaks to the strength of, the writing, direction, and of course the performances of the actors. They were really able to carry the ideas and the emotions in the movie without using music as kind of a crutch, which a lot of films do. It did add a lot to the tension, especially in the scenes in space that had no music.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that must have been a deliberate choice because the only real sounds we heard in space were breathing.
Yeah.
And, as everybody knows, there's no sound in space, so I feel like that had to have been deliberate. The music choice was interesting. It was classical music. Of course, there's the famous opening scene with the drums and I think it's trumpets. Then there's waltz when I believe that's when Haywood is on the Pan Am spaceship. I thought those were interesting choices, but I feel like it didn't really need that much music. I didn't miss it.
There's only two, to my knowledge, two directors that I can think of that use this type of silence or breath or something in the background while it's very quiet. And that is Martin Scorsese in the film Silence. If you haven't seen that film, you got to watch that. One of his most underrated films. And then Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk, where they use the ticking watch. The only two people that I know that use that today, and they're auteurs in their own right. And I think they may have taken that idea from this film because the breathing is so intense. When Dave is in that pod, when he's trying to rescue the other guy, it's just so tense, and you're like, is he going to rescue him? Is he going to rescue him? And it's just so like, I was so on edge. And a lot of people, unfortunately, like see this film as long, arduous, and boring. And I feel like that might be part of it because they're so used to listening to music constantly within film where it's super action packed kind of music, or it's the film is trying to manipulate the audience. So I feel like in a certain degree he didn't want to manipulate the audience only in certain moments when those classical music pieces were in the film. Like when you hear the first one, which will be at the beginning of this podcast, they're showing the dawn of man, and it feels like it's dawn, right? Because the actual song is called Sunrise. But
Yeah, it's bombastic. It's
yeah,
triumphant. That kind of
exactly.
emotion.
And I feel like those parts with the music are perfect for each other. And then the other type of music that's in there is really ethereal. It's really spooky and unknown, and that's when the Monolith is on screen. That's amazing because that's exactly what I thought about this Monolith. Seeing it for the first and second and third time is just like, we don't know what it is. How are we ever going to know what this is, and how is it able to inspire all of these technological evolutions and evolution in general in humanity? And even further, we don't even know what happens to Dave at the end. So I think that is like really fascinating, the way that he used this music and the way he didn't use music in this film. Do you think Hal's impact would be different if he had an interface like a Cortana, or like a physical a quote unquote physical body or face to the actual voice? Do you think the disembodied voice is actually, does that make the menace, and does that make the dead kind of voice and the dead kind of body that he has, quote unquote body, seem more menacing and more realistic?
Yeah, so I think it definitely would have given it a massive change. Part of what Hal was described as was like a computer that could, at the very least, mimic emotion. And they even directly address it in the movie when the interviewer asks one of the astronauts, are Hal's emotions real? And he says, they seem real enough to me, but, I don't know if we'll ever really know. And I think Hal not having a human face or a body or something to look at really does add to the tension of the story. Because Hal was a newer kind of computer, one that can kind of mimic emotions and human speech, and part of the tension and the unease that Hal creates is because we're not really sure if Hal really is as smart as a human or not. Because if Hal is just a computer, then it's just a machine. It doesn't really feel, it's just saying the things it does because it was programmed that way. But if Hal really does feel, I think that opens up a lot of analysis into why Hal did what it did. Where you can tell from the very beginning, when Hal was first introduced, it was hammered over and over again in the movie that no HAL 9000 computer had ever made a mistake. Ever. And it's a very human reaction, I think, to when it does make a mistake. It tries to rationalize it where, no, I didn't make a mistake. Every time a HAL 9000 made a mistake, it ended up being because of a human. And it's trying to rationalize its own mistakes and starts killing the astronauts in order to cover up the fact that it made a mistake. Now, obviously, killing is an extreme reaction, but covering up what you have done wrong, and especially if you are a perfectionist and expect it to be perfect and never let anyone down, it can be really devastating and disruptive to make a mistake. And even if it's a minor one, like Hal did, where Hal thought a component was going to break a couple of days early, but it ended up being fine. I think the flat emotional performance of Hal also adds to the tension and the fear factor.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I think, this is a machine, but is it smart enough to be the same as us? And I think that kind of mixes in with a lot of the other themes of the movie.
What were those themes?
Yeah, so I think one of the big ones is the idea of artificial intelligence in general, and the idea of evolution and creation, where we see the apes at the beginning of the film, and the monolith comes and makes them something more than they were. It gives them more intelligence. And I think the theme with Hal was, can we, having been, created, can we become creators ourselves?
Right.
and what can we make, and what are the consequences of what we make. A lot of the times, and you see this with a lot of technology today, for example, facial recognition technology, it gets made without realizing what the consequences could be,
Right.
because we kind of rush ahead into it and later find out that there are massive, ethical and moral implications to what we've done, but we don't know until after the fact. I also think it's interesting that the first thing that the apes do when they receive this intelligence from the monolith is violence.
Mm-hmm.
They, discover the bones and they start beating them, and, it shows how they use it. And the first thing that Hal does, when you can kind of say Hal became self-aware or
Right.
more than just a machine, is an act of violence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also interesting to think about, like you said, this movie came out in 1968.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, computers were still kind of in their infancy then.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people may have been concerned over whether or not computers were going to be beneficial, or if there were some unintended implications that came a lot of it. And there's a ton of examples I could talk about, but there is a lot going on in the movie with regards to artificial intelligence, and we're still talking about it today. I mean, AI has become a big trend in tech circles, and we're not anywhere close to something like HAL, where it mimics the human brain.
Well, let me just interrupt you there. There was a thing that I've heard about where it was two computers, right? And they had somewhat AI intelligence type of thing. And they started communicating with each other, right? Like that's what and they had like the scientists that oversaw these two computers unplugged them because they weren't sure, because they developed their own language and weren't sure what they were saying. So it's like, it's crazy to see that some of this stuff is like, I mean, 2001 is like coming to fruition a little bit,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we'll get closer and closer as time goes on. A lot of what AI is today that people hear about is really, an algorithm that looks at a lot of data,
Mm-hmm.
and, it's got part of the algorithm changes itself when it has a result it's not intending. So it'll crunch through a ton of data, and eventually it'll have enough examples of what not to do or what to do that it'll kind of be able to make decisions, but it's not really something I would consider like an intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure we'll get closer and closer eventually, and the implications of that will become clear to us.
Well, recently weren't some companies that were developing AI, like I know you just said that it's not really AI to a certain degree of how we think about it, but weren't they now refusing to sell them to militaries now?
Yeah, so that's mainly facial recognition
Okay,
technologies.
that's what it is, yeah.
Yeah, which are run by, quote unquote AIs, but those can be very dangerous, and it still ties into 2001 a bit, because Hal learns of the astronauts' plan to disconnect it through lip reading.
Right.
Which, again, by itself, a computer that you can hook up a camera to that can read lips would be unbelievably impactful,
Mm-hmm.
in ways that, we can imagine, and ways we might not be able to imagine.
Now, with all of these things being so close to us, what you just said, and how it relates to us now, why do you think millennials and younger generations should watch 2001: A Space Odyssey?
So I think people should watch the movie, but I don't think it's a movie for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It is long, even though it didn't really feel like as long as it was.
Not at all.
To me, it felt shorter. I think it's good for anyone interested in science fiction and, kind of wants to try out a slower movie. Today there's a lot of fast-paced kind of movies out. The Marvel movies, the newer Star Wars, even the first Star Wars. It's a lot faster paced, but I think people who like suspense films might like it.
Oh yeah.
And people who are into more kind of, I guess I want to say like artistic kind of movies, especially with that sequence when Dave finally gets to Jupiter.
Oh my God, that was
yeah.
I had like a breakdown at that point. I was like, what is happening? I am so confused and conflicted and scared and like, what is happening?
Yeah, I wasn't super crazy about that part. I think it probably went on too long where it was just landscapes and ocean shots with color filters.
Yeah, I was just like so freaked out by the thought of like extraterrestrial life and like different things like that, because that stuff scares me like to a certain degree, because then it just shatters the whole history and traditions and different things that I revere in my life. And I was just like, whoa. So if you're into AI, you might like this too. I mean, not AI, I'm sorry, extraterrestrial life.
Well, what I kind of took from that scene with all like the colors and everything, where you might say it's, oh well, this is just what Jupiter is supposed to look like. But what I kind of saw, especially when it kind of cut back to Dave's face looking confused as hard, it was more like a human trying to comprehend something that humans just do not have the requisite, brain power,
mental capacity,
not even just mental capacity, be the right kind of eyes to see certain wavelengths. We like humans just don't have the equipment to comprehend. And the that kind of plays into the passage of time, where Dave wakes up in the pod in a room and he keeps seeing progressively older versions of himself, where it seems like maybe the next level of evolution is implied to perceive time in a different way than humans might, where we see it as a linear construction. They might not. It might be more mixed together.
Yeah, I mean, I was freaked out about that whole thing. I was like, okay, well, this is the point in the movie that I was like kind of shut off from. And then when he gets into that room, then I started paying attention more and to understand, or not to understand, but to try to think deeply about what Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote part of the film, or who helped Kubrick write the film, was trying to say. And I kind of saw it differently. So I think, and this is what one of the great things about film is, a lot of people see different parts of movies. They see, oh, this is my perspective, this is my idea about it. I kind of think Dave died at some point. I think Dave died either when he tried to go through, when he tried to blast through the emergency doors, and the rest of the film is his the rest of the film is his journey to the afterlife. And through him seeing the rest of his life in those phases, where he goes from young man to old to the creature or whatever he becomes, this giant fetus.
Space baby,
yeah. It's a space baby. I think that this could be trying to say that there is an afterlife, or it's something that we don't know. This is the great beyond, and maybe we're becoming, or we go through this journey of life and we become something different from what we perceive of life.
Yeah, I think the becoming something different from what we see ourselves as now is a big thing. What I kind of took it to mean is, Dave becomes the next step of evolution above humans, the next level of intelligence, and maybe what it means is in order for us to get to that next step, we need to go into space. And, something that I believe is, for humanity to survive long term on the order of, thousands and millions of years, we need to go into space. We need to leave the Earth and go and expand and find what's out there. Now, will that ever happen? I don't know. I hope it does. But to get to the next step may be incomprehensible to us, and there may be something out there that can comprehend it.
Thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion I had with Tom about Stanley Kubrick's sci-fi masterpiece, 2001: A Space Odyssey. I really enjoyed our discussion and want to say thank you to him for being such a really great and supportive brother. If you enjoyed this episode of Cinemallennials and want to watch the film we discussed, please check out my website, dlumoviereview.com, for more episodes of the podcast, film reviews, analyses, and where to purchase the film we discussed today. Please don't forget to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. Thank you.